Welcome to Merit TV. I'm Samantha.
I'm Dana.
And in this episode, we're joined by a special guest.
I'm Colleen.
And she's here so we can have a conversation about all of the popular topics being discussed in our industry and what you need to know.
So we've gotten a little bit into 2022. It's been a couple of months, and you guys have been attending a few conferences, sitting in on some webinars, and having a lot of client conversations. Colleen, I know you have a ton every single day. And there are some trends that are emerging for this year and for what will likely be occurring throughout the rest of this year. And so I wanted to get us all together so we could kind of talk through what some of those trends are that we're seeing. Have you noticed any?
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest things that I've noticed is change after 2 years of COVID and starting a new year. Staff change, institutional changes, and changes with the students and what they're looking for and hoping to get out of their experience going to school.
And their just experience in general is just completely changed as well. We're moving a lot to online, and online isn't going away now that we're starting to move back to some more in-person stuff. They're still providing some online type of learning, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And a lot more. I mean, and I think that the challenge is how are they going to incorporate all of this online learning and make hybrid more of an actual thing with student experience throughout their career.
And I mean, I think that's like a key word, right? Like no longer is it this or that.
Right.
So long we've thought about online students and we've thought about physical students on our campus. And I think that's a big part of what we need to rethink about and reconfigure, not just from a marketing perspective, but a branding perspective and engagement perspective with students and even faculty.
Oh, yeah.
Because how we've done things in the past is no longer a possibility. But even, to be honest, how we did things during COVID isn't really a possibility. And realizing that pushing students to come back to campus is not the answer. Instead, having that hybrid solution that says, you know what, a student in X course may actually be more efficient away from campus and more engaged away from campus, whether they're an online student or a hybrid student, and really rethinking and reshifting that. I mean, for so long I know you have done a lot of branding things lately, and a big conversation there that we were talking about is, like, so often you're like, my campus is the best, we have all of these things, but if that's your only value prop, you've lost the majority of your audience because so many people are searching for a different type of experience that, you know, the biggest football stadium, or, you know, you have an ice skating rink, or I know Erin was doing a campus visit the other day and she's like, they have a swimming pool. Which, not gonna lie, like, I would totally take a swimming pool at college. It wouldn't have been that efficient in upstate New York, but, you know, that's cool.
That's why it's in Florida.
But yeah, that's true. But, you know, like, does that make something you should be promoting? Is that something that is really going to add value to your prospective students and current students for that matter?
Yeah, well, the focus when we were going through the COVID period of everybody doing everything online was how can we continue to build and show community for all of our students that aren't physically at our campus.
Yeah.
What's happening now, though, is we have students on campus for some in-person events and in-person classes, but now we have this hybrid model of, well, we're also going to have students that are away, that they need to still feel that sense of community. And the sense of community that we had with all of our students on campus and the sense of community that we built with everybody away from campus, they now need to merge together because those strategies aren't going to be successful separately anymore. They need to come together and be able to create more of a fluid community feel amongst all students, whether they're in person or taking things online from home.
So, like, to put that into like one concise theme, right? That would be create a inclusive strategy for all potential experiences at your institution and communicate that. Not only communicate, but actually live it. Have tools and technology so that you can celebrate your students and celebrate the things your institution is accomplishing collectively, but no longer based on who or where or how you're experiencing it. And I think the biggest thing and the biggest conversation has been what products or tools can help you do that. Merit is one. We'll shamelessly plug that.
Shameless plug.
But, you know, there's a lot of other things you can do and think about that student experience all the way through, which kind of brings us over to that branding conversation, right? So much of higher ed is enrollment. That drives what we do and what we can do. But so often that's a fragmented student experience from your marketing enrollment. And then once they get to campus or once they've been accepted, what happens? Where do we drop off that conversation? And how do we continue to engage them, right? A big term is summer melt and evaluating and making sure that we're getting students to come to our institution once they've committed, but then also get them to come back once they've been a freshman or sophomore or junior, so on and so forth. So what are some of the ways I would say that, you know, you can create an experience that also prevents that summer melt that I just mentioned, but also creates that connected experience, right? Like where do we feel that conversation is trickling off, and where do we feel like schools can pick it back up? That was a popular theme in a lot of webinars lately, and especially at some of the conferences, is creating that connected experience all the way through the process.
Right. Because it kind of feels like, as a student, I mean, I can talk about my own experience. As a student, when I was accepted into my college, we had that big like welcoming day and like a week of all this like fun activity and events that were going on campus when we first got there. And then within like a couple of weeks, it was like, okay, well, we got you.
Your old news, right?
Right? Yeah. You're here now.
Yeah.
And of course, there were still things that were going on for the all of the students, like campus-wide events that you could go and participate in, and those are important, but there was this clear drop-off from you're a first-time student here, we're here to support you and make you feel comfortable and offer you a lot of these new experiences, to okay, now you're just one of everybody that's here now. And that shift was very apparent, and I think as a student that can sometimes feel like a turnoff to them, where they're like, I felt wonderful about coming here and we had a great experience in the beginning, but now I still feel like, okay, I needed more help past that point. I'm not still fully comfortable with what's going on. I need more from my institution still.
So one of the conferences we attended, I heard a wonderful speech, and they talked about, you know, building this community and branding your school to be a community. It's different now, and it's really about the students and maybe the faculty, but what they're doing. It's building pride and making that the community isn't necessarily the campus anymore. So his theme in that speech was that the institution is no longer the star of your story. So you have to talk about what the students are doing, what is the faculty doing, make those stories what you are using for your branding. It's all about the pride. I also saw a whole rebranding strategy, and it was really about centered on that logo, and most of it is like an athletics logo because that's what people know anywhere they are, but it's having pride in that, even though you maybe are not on the football team.
Right.
But pride in being a tiger or a bear or whatever you are, and what does that mean? And so it really goes well with what I've been talking about with clients lately, is that they want to write more stories about what the students are doing. So enrollment and acceptance are themes that are talked about a lot right now, and writing stories on all of the students that are being accepted and enrolled, and using those stories to promote the pride of becoming a tiger, or whatever.
Yeah.
And then additionally, beyond acceptance and enrollment, how do you kind of build sense of community for people who are hybrid or completely remote, because that is the way things are going. So the community doesn't have to be just about like being on campus and attending those games or doing those on-campus events. What are the people who are a part of this institution doing and making you proud to be a part of that community in that sense?
I think that's huge, right? Because it comes down to value. Like, are you providing value in not only everything you're putting out there, but every conversation you're trying to have with a current student or even a prospective student, right? So a lot of themes around conversations are like, what am I going to put out on social media, or how am I going to engage? But it's like, is there value there? Are they gaining something from that experience? Or are you just creating content because you're jumping on the, like, you know, hey, I'm going to get views train, right? So you're trying to increase your analytics falsely because there's really no value there, or are you actually chasing value for maybe a smaller subset of individuals? And kind of to your comment, I think one of the biggest things a school should do in evaluating the student experience is take a look at, from the point of prior to application, so discovery phase for a student, what tools and pieces of technology are they encountering? What software programs are you using? Then look at it from, okay, they've applied, what tools are they using and what portals are they required to go into, right? There's always gonna be the ones that don't have anything to do with you, ignore those. But then once they're accepted, what are you doing? How are you communicating to them? What are you pushing to them? Then what are you doing in that interim, right? So the whole point of an accepted story is now you're like engaging them further between that dead summer phase. Really, like, you got nothing to say because they're getting ready to come. Maybe you're sending some like information if they're physically coming to your campus, or, you know, coursework, sign up for your schedule if they're online, but what portals are you using there? And then to your point, when you come to school, what portals am I using now? Am I maintaining any of those? Am I having to consistently switch? Like, what is that digital experience? So often, because we've been physically centered on a campus, we've thought about that as the primary form of communication.
Right.
But put that list together and do it for all of those different aspects of individuals. And I would even ask you to say, is it the same for online students and students that may come to school, or even those hybrid?
Right.
And then identify, like, what are we actually asking our students to do? Are we creating a consistent digital experience for them? And evaluate that. Because how is that going to provide any value if you're going from A to B to D to C?
Yeah.
You know, like.
And all the students that are going to get enrolled now are completely tech savvy. So any
Right.
type of technology that you put in front of them, they have full capability of being able to use, but you have to assess how many pieces of technology are you asking the student to use.
Yeah.
There's so many options out there, and if you're constantly asking them to switch and learn something new, they're eventually going to fall off.
Yeah, it's funny, I wasn't meaning to giggle at you, but we all come from like an agency background, and you always think that, you know, who's your competitor? It's no longer you're competing against the school 5 miles away,
Right.
or 50 or 5,000. You're competing for time and attention, and you're competing against this computer, the cell phone that's on your lap right now. Not to call you out, but no, we're competing against all of those things. Like, what are you doing when you're not engaged at school or
Right.
in any capacity? And I think we need to change that from a marketing perspective when we're thinking about how we're putting out that content and how we're trying to engage those students. So a couple of pointers there on how to create a better student experience and how to kind of evaluate that. We'd love to hear what you guys are doing, what's working for you, and maybe tools that have changed the game. Definitely merit. Yes. But there were a couple of other things we heard about on the conference circle as well.
So we just spent a lot of time talking about the student experience and how the institution can incorporate students into their branding and their marketing, but they're not the only ones that are part of the institution that should be focused on. We also should be focusing on faculty, do you think?
Yes, I completely agree, and I'm glad you mentioned that. I'll say a common quote, and probably a lot of people use this quote, but I've heard this quote verbatim from about 5 or so clients in the past month, that they want their staff to work smarter, not harder. After COVID, you know, budgets are going down or staff's changing around. It's a common concern, but everybody's overworked. That is something that's happening. They're all overworked and they're not able to do like the job that they want to do or that they should be doing. And most of it in marketing is writing these stories or actually doing marketing work and not COVID related marketing or all of those other things. So I think just kind of, you know, supporting the staff again and faculty throughout the whole institution. I'm sure it's the same in all departments, but just supporting them, giving them the tools that they need to be able to kind of do their jobs again and in a smarter way. They don't need to spend more time working. They need to be have ways to do what they want to do better, more efficiently. Yeah. Of course, merit allows that to happen too. But
I swear this wasn't trying to be a sales pitch. But I mean, on the CSM, you have these conversations about how you can recommend strategies for them. And I think a big part about that too, right, is showing the value and the value we as an institution place on our faculty and staff members and how they're contributing to the conversation, right? Without them, we wouldn't be open for business. So having a way to not only promote them, but also, like you said, be smarter, not harder. We said it earlier. There may be a more efficient way to offer a course not physically on campus, maybe a hybrid, maybe completely online, works better for that subject matter, that student, and that professor. And so also thinking about not only being efficient in that capacity, but then how do we use them? Because, I mean, to be honest, it's a little bit, but how do we use them to propel themselves higher in their career, in our institution, in the accolades and acknowledgments they receive? And how do we use that to provide value to our prospective students, current students, and all audiences we serve, right? I mean, if we're not highlighting the research our faculty is doing or the courses that they're now offering and the new coursework that they're creating, we're lacking that creative edge. And in addition to that, potential students, alumni that could come back and go to, you know, take courses, things like that, all suffer.
Right.
And that's what you've been doing a lot, right? Like, I feel like a lot of them are saying, hey, you know, I have this population that is extremely valuable to our institution. I'm not doing anything for them, right? Because essentially the marketer's role is to do something for them, to be part of the conversation. And that's how you provide value, is doing something for them, and in return it lifts up your institution because that's where they are. So you're like promoting yourself without having to say and beating your chest. Dan would kill me if I beat my chest, but beating my chest, you know.
And say, look at me, look at me.
Exactly. So
I just want to go back to the conversation that we were having when we were talking about student experience. And you and I were talking a lot about what that looks like in terms of their digital experience, the different applications that a school may be asking a student to engage and use. One thing that schools also should realize is that each piece of technology that they put in front of a student or they ask a student to use is going to give them a certain subset of data. And as we propel forward in 2022, it would be remiss of us to think that we're not going to get more data as we continue forward in the future. So how have schools talked about how they're utilizing that data, or how they can make sure that they're leveraging it in a way that benefits both the student, the faculty, as well as the campus as a whole?
Oh God, I could say like a million things about it. Like 5 different directions. So first I would say, I think that's going to be a really big theme for the next year, right? It has been, but I think actually leveraging the appropriate pieces of data and technology in conjunction with one another is going to be what we focus on, and what those partners are that actually make a difference in what we do. And it's not that everything has to have, you know, a full ROI that you can track back to admissions, but what it is making sure that you're making data-based decisions. So often things are influenced by a board or alumni, or, I mean, heck, you even said it earlier, right? Your experience when you were an undergrad. We cannot pull from that. We need to pull from current experiences and what the data is showing us, and then use that to make informed decisions. And so, for example, one of the schools we were talking to and did some presentations at one of the conferences was talking about how they actually put some things in place pre-COVID, but coming out of COVID, one of the biggest concerns is admissions and retention of students. So taking a look at data and saying, okay, what information can I look at that I can then identify a potential influence of whether or not they come back for another semester or another school year with us. And one of the things they did was they looked at the amount of funding the student needed to be able to attend, the scholarships that they were providing, the demographic information of the students. And this school was able to do it because they all had FAFSA information and things like that, but looked at that and compared that to a number of other pieces of data, and then started to say, okay, you know what, we're not necessarily going to take money away from people or give a ton more money, but what if we reevaluated how that's provided, and we reevaluated certain aspects of that? And, you know, I'm not going to go into the whole thing, but the point of that is, it was about retention. And so they went back and looked at all of the data available to them, and they said, these few pieces of information are most valuable to us. Then they were able to have a inclusive conversation, and I think that's another thing, is if you are a marketer, if you're in admissions and you're being given these initiatives, which we know happens, it happens everywhere, regardless of if you're actually having an inclusive conversation, but you have to be the advocate to say, I need a seat at this table. And honestly, that's the way, you know, sure, maybe you kind of piss some people off sometimes, but it's also the way you show people that there needs to be an opportunity for an inclusive conversation on campus. And that wasn't your question or comment, but I think part of also what we need to do internally is advocate for that if your institution doesn't currently have that inclusive conversation, because that's also why things aren't working out together. Because if you're not having a seat at the table, you're just being asked to probably bring data back, and then there's no collective conversation about all of those pieces of information and then what to do with them. And that's just one example, but I think data is going to be huge in how we use it, and use the right data, right? So you can go in Google Analytics, you can go on Facebook, you can go into, you know, your CRM and look at information on accepted students versus attended students, all of this. But not all of it is necessary. Like, some stuff is just stuff.
Well, there's also like a data overload that you have to push through and figure out what are the key metrics that I actually want to engage with and pay attention to amidst this entire realm and land of data that's presented in front of me because of all these tools that we have available to us now.
Yeah. I think another thing on that note, and then I'll stop on that topic, but to that point, right, is what is your policy now? So it's great to use data, but it's also fair to use data. And I just say this because some people, departments are more inclined to have that. And sure, if you seriously cannot get data to support whatever your conversation is, well, then let's maybe take a step back and see if we're missing something. But how are you then creating a culture of informed decisions at your institution? You know, does everybody have to supply a case study if they're advocating for more faculty or more resources? You know, is that an even playing field, and is it an open conversation amongst the institution so everybody knows how to fairly go about asking for resources? Because you said it earlier as well as yourself, like with COVID, we've had to change things. Our budgets have been constrained, our faculty has been constrained, we need to work harder, not smarter. And while data may sound harder, it's, yeah, sure, some heavy lifting up front, but then if you have these processes, you can go in as the marketing team and say, hey, I'm advocating for this because of why, and here's the proof that I need to support that, versus if you're just like, hey guys, like, not that you sound like that, but, you know, like, hey, you were the least Valley girl I know.
I know.
But if you were like, you know, hi, you know, here's my presentation, I'm looking for this software with no data behind why it's necessary or what it's going to do for faculty, staff, or anyone else for that matter. So I think also making sure not only do you have the data piece locked down and how you're going to use it yourself, but then also what is that institutional policy to create an even playing field, or as much as possible, for advocating for whatever.
Yeah, well, I think also if you don't have that inclusive conversation, then you don't have the context that goes with the data. If the data is just provided to outside people that they weren't involved in the process of acquiring it, measuring it, and then coming to those conclusions based on the data, they're missing out on the context and they just get the answers that they're looking for, which will help spur their conversation, but they're missing some key components to help them really understand what's going on. And so if we don't have, like you're saying, that inclusive conversation with all parties involved, then we're missing out on some pieces of data, essentially, that would help us make better decisions with the data.
Yeah. I think there's so many things that we're going to continue to see to change and evolve. And even these conversations in 6 months from now may no longer be the common themes we're seeing, but I know it was so much fun to get back out on the road, to go to some conferences. I know you've been attending all the webinars. But, you know, let's wrap it up. So what were some of those themes and things we want to kind of like make sure we remember as we go into more of 2022, 2023 and kick off those school years?
I think change being number one, and change just goes across all themes, I think, because everybody has to think about how things have changed. It's been a very, you know, long 2 years of forced change on everyone. And then because of that, what has changed in the landscape of, you know, college education and what people are looking for. You know, the students aren't the same, the type of students aren't the same, where they're coming from aren't the same, and what they're looking to get out of their college career is not the same. So, I mean, all of that talk we just had too about the data and presenting the data in a way of, you know, I'm using this because I want to do A, B, and C. Like, maybe you got to look at A, B, and C first and say, what is your new purpose? And then what type of data do I need to collect? Because maybe you need to make an entire change in that too, of looking at what type of data you're collecting and how you're collecting it.
That's like gold right there.
Yeah. Well, a big theme that we also talked about too was just inclusivity, not only for students as a whole, but the types of students that we have, whether they're going to be in person or they're going to be online learners, as well as your faculty as well. All that's a whole group of people that need to be included in all of the strategies that your institution are putting forth and developing to help ensure that you're providing the best experience for all parties involved.
Yeah, and I think just remembering that the students, the faculty, the staff really need to be focused on and promoted and made, you know, known, make people aware of what the people are doing in your institution, in that community. To entice people to want to be a part of it.
Very true. Well, we thank you for being a part of our Merit community, and we know these are only a few of the conversations happening currently. We'd love to hear the ones you're a part of. Shoot us an email, comment below. We'd love to know more about what you're doing in your institution or the conversations you're having with your colleagues. As always, if you need any help with Merit, have questions or concerns, you can reach out to Colleen, myself, or Dana over at csm@meritpages.com. We'll see you next time.